Right. Oh, hi, Carmel. Hi, Tamara. Hi, Allison. We're just going to wait a few more minutes while we've got time.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Queensland Heat Health Community of Practice final event for 2024. Very glad you could join us, and very welcome to everybody who's come along and taken the time out of their busy days, especially at this time of the year. We do appreciate it, and no doubt more will join as we continue. I'm Dr. Tony Matthews. I'll be in part chairing this session with the help of Shannon Haynes from Moreton Bay City Council, who I'll introduce shortly. Thank you, Shannon. She's waving enthusiastically in the background. We're very, very pleased today to have our colleagues from WSROC present their new Exploring the Cool Suburbs tool, which is really quite exciting and a really, really fantastic tool, and something that's catching a huge amount of attention, not just in New South Wales, where it was initially developed, but all around the country. And so we're really pleased to have an opportunity to hear from our colleagues and have them present their work to us and talk a little bit about its applications potentially in Queensland. We are, of course, based in and focused on Queensland with the QCOP, but we're very enthusiastic to hear how this tool might be adapted here. What we might do is we'll very quickly jump forward, if you don't mind, Ella or Anjali, and have a very brief acknowledgement of country. Griffith University acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting, and indeed the lands on which all of you are meeting, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and we extend that respect to all Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. This morning we have or this afternoon, I should say, my apologies, we have a packed agenda, a very brief welcome and introduction from myself. Then I'm going to hand over to our colleagues from WSROC, who will present their slides and their toolkit. We will then shift to an audience questions and answer session that will be chaired by Shannon Haynes. And then we will come back and we will have some very brief closing remarks. Now, just on the Q&A, could I just say at this point that during the presentation from WSROC, if anyone has a question that they really want to get down and get written down, please feel free to drop it into the chat during the presentation. We will address those questions in the Q&A following the presentation, and we will also have an opportunity to take live questions from people that want to put their hands up and ask a question at the time, or anyone that might want to follow up on a topic or something that's currently under discussion. Anyone may have something to contribute or whatever. So we'll do our best to accommodate all things. But if you have a question that comes up in the first few minutes, please feel free to record it in the chat. Some quick notes there, keeping microphones all off. That I'm sure you're all well used to this stuff from these kinds of meetings. And just jumping on again, please. Very brief introductions. I'm Dr. Tony Matthews, co-lead of the QCOP, the Queensland Heat Health Community of Practice, with Shannon Rutherford, who is the other co-lead. We founded and still lead the QCOP. Today is not the day for it, but I'm delighted to say the future of the QCOP is looking extremely bright for the next couple of years. So expect to hear more from us in 2025. We'll be very active. And joining us today is a great colleague and friend and member of our advisory group, Shannon Haynes, who's going to, as I mentioned, chair the Q&A. Shannon is a very, very experienced practicing planner, currently with Moreton Bay City Council, and has a fantastic professional history in the planning profession and as an advocate for good planning through the Planning Institute and other ventures. She's very interested personally and professionally in heat and has been for quite some years. So we've had a very good working relationship with Shannon, and we're just thrilled that she's joined us for the Q&A, and she'll share that today. So thanks again, Shannon. Shannon Rutherford is in the audience, but not chairing or participating formally, but she's here and delighted to be. Our two colleagues from WSROC, what I will do at this point is hand over to Kelly first and then Judith to introduce themselves, and then allow them to move directly into their presentation. So with that, I'll say bye for now, and I will see you all towards the end. Many thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly G. I'm the Policy and Projects Officer at WSROC, and I've got my colleague Judith on the line here too, who's our project coordinator at WSROC. For you, those of you who aren't familiar with WSROC, we're a local membership organisation for local government focused in Western Sydney. Go to the next slide. There we go. I'd also like to acknowledge I'm coming to you today, and Judith is as well, from Darug country in Western Sydney, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. And I know we've already been through the agenda, so I'll quickly give you a bit of background on WSROC and our heat work and the context to the Cool Suburbs tool, and then we'll get Judith to jump right into the structure and the function of the tool so you can get a really good sense of what that looks like. And we are really keen to understand how this might apply to the Queensland context and some of the questions you might have. So very keen to answer any questions on the call today. So firstly, the Cool Suburbs assessment was funded by the Australian and New South Wales governments under a funding program called the Disaster Risk Reduction Fund. And like many of WSROC's projects, we are a really small kind of not-for-profit team. So we've worked with a really great range of partners to bring this project to life. The project, the Cool Suburbs assessment, is based on a science translation exercise, which was led by NetGain Advisory and contributed to by a range of academic experts and technical experts from across different universities and different consultancies, which you can see there. And we've also then, on the basis of that science translation and rationale document, which is available for reading if you're interested, worked with a working group of practitioners to really understand the user needs of different parts of the design and planning system and develop a user interface that's really practical and slides seamlessly into whatever type of role that our partners are doing, from the local government level to some of our big national industry associations. So just to give everyone a bit of background and context, I obviously don't need to convince you all that heat's a really important challenge that we need to be addressing in cities across Australia and the world. But in terms of WSROC, in terms of why a group of local councils are developing, I guess, a heat tool that's potentially got national scale application. The reason that WSROC has been so interested in heat is because it affects our communities, it affects our Western Sydney economy, and it's something that our political leaders and communities are strongly asking us to address. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Sydney, it can be 10 degrees hotter than the Sydney CBD. There's a really big climatic variation in our city, but also for Western Sydney, we do have really pockets of high socioeconomic disadvantage, which ties into cost of living and energy costs. We have really high levels of chronic disease like heart disease and diabetes, which of course make people more vulnerable to heat-related illness. But we also have less access to services and see more infrastructure disruptions, whether that's transport and public transport, energy disruptions, or access to health services that create real pockets of risk and vulnerability in our region. So for that reason, WSROC does do a lot of work in the heat space, and I wanted to take the opportunity to flag that while Cool Suburbs is one of our big flagship projects, we have been working on a range of other initiatives, whether they be research reports or tools that might be of interest to the group. Particularly in the urban planning space, we've done some reviews of the National Construction Code and how those standards will function in heat waves without power and in future climates. We've developed some resources in partnership with our local health districts and councils around community preparedness for heat waves in different languages as well. And we've also been looking at heat risk assessment. And I think the big one, last week we launched the Greater Sydney Heat Smart City Plan, where we've been trying to work with different stakeholders at different levels of government, in industry and the community sector to really understand how heat is governed in Greater Sydney and look at some priority actions. So any of those resources, feel free to jump onto our website. Judith and I would be happy to answer questions if there's something in there that really piques your interest. So the last thing I'll touch on before I hand over to Judith is our resilience approach to heat. And I'll touch on this because it's really prominent in the Cool Suburbs interface when you jump in there, but also because we really use this 4-step framework to underpin all of our work. We find it really useful when we are working cross-sectorally, where people have different definitions of heat and different ways of understanding hazard management, to really ensure we're looking at the issue holistically. So it's fairly self-explanatory, but step 1, awareness, really refers to understanding the challenge you're trying to address before jumping in, but also about building that heat literacy. And that's why that's part of the Cool Suburbs tool, because we really are keen to build understanding and awareness of the issue of heat as a holistic challenge. Step 2 is reduce, and refers to efforts to address the underlying drivers of heat risk, whether that's climate change or urban heat islands. But we also know in step 3 that there are measures like bus shelters, drinking fountains, and others that we'll need to implement. They don't necessarily reduce the heat we experience, but help us function in a hotter climate and make sure our cities are ready to do that as we move forward. And step 4 is respond, which acknowledges that no matter how well we mitigate and adapt to our changing climate, we are going to have events that require emergency response, and we need to be ready to support, whether it's our health sector, whether it's our emergency service professionals, or communities managing in those extreme events. So that framework, if you see it come up, does feature quite heavily in the Cool Suburbs tool, but is also useful generally, I think, when we're exploring different parts of the heat challenge. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Judith to jump into the Cool Suburbs tool.
Excellent. Thanks, Kelly. And hi, everyone. And thanks very much for the opportunity to present to you today. So yeah, that brings us to Cool Suburbs. So we know that urban design is absolutely critical to not only reduce urban heat, but also reduce energy requirements or protect our communities from the impacts of extreme heat waves. We know that there's lots of research available on the way that our urban environments can either exacerbate or mitigate heat. But what we found was that there was a real need to translate this research into practical guidance and application. And that's really what Cool Suburbs aims to do. So what is Cool Suburbs? It's a web-based platform, a web-based assessment that really translates research and best practice into practical application to guide heat resilience. Cool Suburbs is designed to be used by both industry and government, so to be used by planners, by developers, and by designers. Cool Suburbs is designed to really do several things. So it provides decision support for heat resilient design. It's an opportunity to benchmark best practice. It supports policy development, and it can also be used for information and education purposes. The assessment provides a star rating to show how well your development addresses heat resilience, and it can be used across different development types and scales, so from master plan communities down to individual buildings. Cool Suburbs can be used on existing suburbs and new suburbs, and it's relevant across the entire planning process, from strategic planning to development application and assessment. So it's not just an evaluation of the final design, it can actually be used to inform the whole process. So I'll flag that Cool Suburbs is voluntary. It has suggestions for evidence that is needed to meet the criteria under the assessment tool, and it currently relies on self-assessment. And lastly, I just wanted to flag that it's so really best practice guidance and assessment rather than a simulation modeling approach. So if we go to the next slide, so here you see the headline heat resilience considerations that were identified and reviewed by the science panel. So the Cool Suburbs website includes a science rationale that Kelly already referred to previously, and that can be downloaded from the website. That science rationale really provides an overview of the science translation and how each of these considerations has been addressed in the tool. And the aim of this science rationale is really to provide transparency on the considerations that are underpinning the assessment. So including that relationship between the research and the weighting and the scoring of the different credits in Cool Suburbs. So in the next slides, we'll go into sort of the assessment framework. So in brief, Cool Suburbs uses this sort of 5-step process to really determine the heat resilience performance of your development. So you start off with your project description that really details where you plug in the details of your development, which will then determine which criteria are applicable to your project. Then your project assessment really shows you how you can satisfy the credits related to your development. And then the star rating shows you how well your project addresses those criteria. The heat impact scores show you the performance impact of your project. And the assessment also includes a heatwave safe communities checklist. So this provides guidance on community heat resilience, but the checklist does not currently count towards a Cool Suburbs rating. It's really there to start with that awareness rating of how we can increase community resilience. So what does Cool Suburbs look like? So on this slide, you can see the landing page here on the right-hand side. And there's a few components that you can see here on this landing page. So the white box in the middle allows you to get started on your development straight away. Via the menu at the top, you can see that you can access information and resources. And all the way on the right-hand side there, you can see that you can also log in and save your projects on the website. So to start an assessment, I would basically plug in the details in the details of my project in the white box on the Rate Your Development, and then I would click Start Assessment, and I'll go to the following screen. So this shows you basically the assessment framework or the assessment portal. And when you want to rate your development, the assessment asks you to plug in the following information on your projects that you can sort of see here in the little letters. So A, your climate zone. So weightings and credit selections are determined by your local climate. B, development type. So different credits apply to different development types. See your land use distribution. So your land use mix is used to adjust credit points and impact scores for your development. Credit categories. So at the top there, the tool will show you which credit categories apply for your development. So based on everything that you filled in on the left-hand side of your screen, the tool will switch on and off which categories apply to your development. You can expand each of these categories to show what credits are applicable and see the guidance associated with them. And a little bit later, we'll go through that as well. On the sort of next to the categories, you can see the heat safe community checklist. Like I said before, this does not count towards your credit score, but it really is aimed at encouraging building community heat resilience. So it suggests ways in which community resilience can be improved, for example, by providing education, heat shelters, conducting heat risk assessment, ensure we provide drinking water and those kind of interventions. So drilling into each of these a little bit further, so climate zones, this is obviously of interest, I imagine, to the group here today. Cool Suburbs was developed for New South Wales, but we have used the Australian Building Code climate zones. So currently the assessment considers 6 of the 8 climate zones listed under the ABCB. Climate Zone 1, Tropical North, and Climate Zone 3, sort of the arid country, are currently not included. So for Queensland, that means that when you look at the map, that the orange inland area and the dark orange northern sections are currently not included in Cool Suburbs. But in theory, Cool Suburbs can be used basically from the Gold Coast up to Mackay in Queensland. We are very keen to expand the tool to also include those last 2 climate zones. And we would like to very much test Cool Suburb application in jurisdictions beyond New South Wales, so including Queensland as well. So this table shows you the development types included in Cool Suburbs and which categories it applies to. So you can see that, for example, for a medium development, which is described as 100 to 1,000 lots, that all credit categories apply to this development type, whereas for a local mixed-use development, for example, you only need to satisfy 4 Cool Suburbs categories. In future updates for the tool, we're actually keen to improve this area of the tool. We know that certain land use typologies currently are missing. For example, health precincts or university campuses is something that we're keen to add in the mix as well. So the next slide, you can see what we mean when we talk about land use distribution. Land use distribution mix for your development is used to adjust credit scores and impact scores. And this is also another area where we're looking to build improvements, particularly by adding in a bit more nuance and using this part of the tool to also guide better practice. So in the next slide, we're really getting to the crux of Cool Suburbs. So this is where we're listing the categories and the credits. So the assessment has 6 categories and 28 credits. So if you click next slide, the credit should appear. And as you saw on the previous slide, depending on your development scale and type, the assessment will adjust which categories apply to your developments and what credits you should satisfy. So the science panel did identify a few non-negotiables. So if you click next, you can see that there's mandatory credits that are sort of listed with that little sort of square across them, and minimum effort thresholds, which are the ones with the little asterisks there. So mandatory credits must be met to even receive a Cool Suburbs rating. So if you don't meet them, you don't even get a score. Minimum threshold credits were also deemed really important by the science panel, but you can still get a Cool Suburbs rating without meeting those credits. However, if you don't meet them, points will be deducted from your rating. So the next slide, you'll see a credit example and what sort of a credit looks like. So each credit provides you with the outcomes that that credit is intended to achieve, the points awarded when you satisfy that credit, the credit criteria and the evidence requirements to show if you have satisfied that criteria, and design guidance to assist you actually meeting that criteria. Each credit also includes a science rationale or links out to the scientific rationale to actually have why that credit is included in Cool Suburbs. So the next slide will go to the assessment outcome. So if you have done your assessment, you plugged in your details, you get a Cool Suburbs star rating. So a star rating is calculated on the scale from 1 to 5 stars, with 1 star representing the minimum requirements of the mandatory credits and 5 stars representing that your project satisfies all applicable credits. I will flag there's 2 innovation credits, and these are awarded to recognize exceptional practice. They go beyond the 5-star rating. So by achieving the innovation credits, a project can earn credits that push the final rating beyond 5 stars. So you could get a 5++ star rating if you satisfy all credits plus the 2 innovation credits. So the heat impact score that you can see here on the right-hand side evaluates your project's heat mitigation performance, and this is calculated relative to an ideal development. So an ideal development would be a development that meets all applicable credits. So this score really indicates the percentage of heat benefit that is achieved for your development. So the next slide. So Cool Suburbs allows you to log in and save your project and export your assessment results in a PDF. And that PDF looks something like you can see here on the screen. And this is particularly important because if we go to the next slide for potential Green Star rating. So we're really excited that Cool Suburbs is an accepted pathway for Green Star communities. The up-to-date Green Star communities now has a heat resilience credit. So Cool Suburbs can now be used to satisfy this credit, and the exported PDF that we showed you on the previous slide can be submitted as evidence that your project has satisfied that credit. So the great news is that Cool Suburbs is already being used. We were able to include a couple of early adoption case studies on our website. Several of our councils have used Cool Suburbs to make updates to their development control plans. Blacktown City Council currently is using Cool Suburbs to inform one of their town centre master plans. That's, by the way, not yet listed as a case study, but it should appear online really shortly. And several developers in New South Wales have now used Cool Suburbs to either achieve Green Star rating or to inform their developments. I'll flag that Bradfield Development Authority is the authority that oversees the development of the city surrounding the new Western Sydney Airport in New South Wales, and Bradfield Development Authority have committed to become a Cool Suburbs rated development in their master plan. And they have also used Cool Suburbs to inform the design of their first building. So there's already a building that has been built based on Cool Suburbs principles. So that's quite exciting. So overall, the feedback that we've received from users of Cool Suburbs is that the tool was considered quite robust, a robust model, and that really increased the confidence in implementing change. The teams that were successful in applying Cool Suburbs generally used the assessments and the information to really engage with teams across their organisation, including their planning teams, their design teams, also their executive. And several several of our, particularly our developers, have identified that they also see the use of cool suburbs as an important tool to demonstrate how they are addressing climate change risk as well. So the team, we're always looking for additional case studies. So if you click next, that's just a bit of a shout out to really understand how cool suburbs is being used. If this is something that you are interested in, please get in touch. We know, like I said, all of the case studies that we have so far are from New South Wales. We're very keen to see how the tool would apply in a Queensland context and test that out with you. So that's definitely a call to the room here today. So I guess that's it for us. I'll close off with saying that Cool Suburbs live now. Please go and use it. I'll say that while Cool Suburbs is ready to be used, it's certainly not finished. We've got a big spreadsheet with all the feedback that we're collating, and we will continue to make updates. Noting it is Cool Suburbs, it's externally funded, so we do depend on the external funding for how far or how much we can do at this stage. We certainly welcome any feedback, and yeah, like I said before, if you're interested in being a case study, please do get in touch as well, and our details are here on the screen. That's it for now. Very happy to take questions. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, both Kelly and Judith. That was really fascinating and very insightful. Very happy to hand over to Shannon Haynes to chair what will undoubtedly be a lively Q&A. There's some questions already in the comments and many more to come, I'm sure. So Shannon, if you're ready, I'm happy to hand over and let you take the reins, please.
Thanks, Tony. And Judith and Kelly, thank you so much for that presentation. This is a very, very exciting tool that WSROC has developed, and I think just reiterating that call out, we've got a lot of local government people on the seminar today, so please think about if you would like to pilot, and let's test the Cool Suburbs tool in Queensland. So look, I'm just looking at the chat, and look, I've got a few questions up my sleeve, but I'd like to go to the first question in the chat, which is a very good one around. It's from John Mab. So is it based upon current climate or future climate? How have those climate assumptions been factored in?
So the science panel did consider both current and future sort of climate scenarios, and what you see reflected in the tool is basically the consensus of the panel on what we would build, what we should be building now that would also withstand sort of any sort of future climate scenarios. And some of the impact scores that you will see on the tool as well, you can see that they have identified sort of short-term, medium-term and long-term impacts, particularly looking at the interventions that are proposed, like that the tool spits out for you to implement, noting that some of those interventions, particularly green space, will probably take several years to actually, completely, so that benefit can completely to materialize. So sort of future scenarios, both in terms of benefits, but also in terms of climate scenarios, have definitely been considered.
So just on that, does it allow you to actually select which shared socioeconomic pathway scenario, or is it actually fixed?
It's fixed, so you can't
Right.
sort of select the scenario. So it is also that the science panel, they consider sort of future scenarios, but then sort of came to the consensus of what interventions would be suited for what climate zone, depending on current and future climate sort of scenarios, if that makes sense.
No, that's great. Thank you. So look, I just encourage everyone, put your questions in the chat. If it's a more complex question, please put your hand up and you can go live. Look, another question that I've got up my sleeve, Judith and Kelly. Obviously, cities and suburbs, they have their own characteristics that are contributing and making their own thermal environment. Can you tell us a little bit about, is it appropriate to carry across or replicate heat resilience solutions from one city to another city or from one suburb to another suburb? Or do you actually have to assess what the vulnerabilities and heat resilience response options are at a more like local or place-based scale?
Did you want me to jump in with that?
Yep, happy for
Judith?
you to go first.
Obviously, I guess, and that's why, so obviously the Cool Suburbs tool, and I'll touch on another program that we're doing that probably speaks to that a little bit as well. Obviously, the Cool Suburbs tool has been developed for those building code board climate zones. And technically, when you look at those, somewhere like Coffs Harbour is in the same climate zone as somewhere like Mackay. And I guess that's why we're really, in theory, the basic principles should apply across that climate zone, but we know that to be really, really certain of exactly what those outcomes are, we really do need to pilot and test in those different locations. Things like increasing tree canopy and shading and that type of thing, obviously aren't going to be harmful and generally will apply across a really wide scope of climate zones. But at the same time, we know that there's potentially nuance in there, which we'd like to explore. One of the, I guess, another program that I mentioned a bit earlier that we've recently completed, and only for, I guess, looking at the Greater Sydney region, is our heatwave risk assessment project. And I think that was one of the questions that we were really trying to draw out as part of that project. We know, working with quite a diverse range of local government areas, often programs, funding, particularly grant funded programs from the state government, were focused on particular solutions to heat resilience, and mainly in our city that has been greening. But that heat risk assessment was really really breaks down some of the drivers behind heat risk. So we can see that in some places, canopy expansion is probably the most important thing you can do. But in other areas, like in parts of far west Sydney, we have a really great canopy cover, potentially quite low, lower levels of urban development. We know it's quite hot. We know there are vulnerable communities. So in those communities, focusing on establishing community spaces or indoor buildings or community outreach programs might be really important solutions in those areas. And that kind of spans across urban development into more programmatic responses as well. But I suppose there does also always need to be a little bit of a kind of location-based tailored approach from councils, particularly because councils know their communities best and will be able to target responses in that regard.
Great, thank you. And we've got a couple of questions in the chat, which is wonderful. Carla has asked, can you comment on the timeframes to include the 2 missing zones for Queensland? I was waiting for that one to come up.
Hopefully soon. So like I said, like Kelly said, we're quite a small organisation. We're depending on sort of external funding. So we're hoping to be able to do this within next year. But yeah, it will depend to an extent on sort of what additional funding we're getting. So it's the top of the list for us. But yeah, we'll hopefully soon. I will say that the general sort of guidance and information in the science rationale and in the tool is probably still very relevant, even if the individual credits are not one-on-one applicable, but just sort of the general sort of the tool and using it to inform policy or decisions or even just education, it could no doubt be quite useful for some of those areas as well.
And there's certainly those zones that are missing. There's certainly very, very warm places
Yes.
in Queensland. So yeah, that sounds great. Joe has asked the question, how is resolution considered within the tool? Given it's a self-assessment, what information do users need to inform that?
So that depends on your sort of development scale. So the tool allows you to look at sort of an individual building and plug in the details for that, or a street or a park or a suburb. So depending on sort of the scale and type of your development, it asks you to fill out the details, and that's sort of the information that it then spits out. So it's not necessarily like a grid measurement or anything. It really depends on the scale and the type of development that you're plugging in, and that's sort of the information that it provides you back.
Great. And I suppose just on the scale of application for the tool. So you've mentioned that you can apply the tool at like a regional scale, like a structure plan scale or a suburb scale, street, down to individual lot. Based on what you've seen, and I think I know what the answer will be to this, but I think it's a worthwhile question. Based on what you've seen and all the research that's been done, if you had to choose one scale of planning where you could really get the biggest bang for your buck in heat resilience, what would you say? Or is it a combination, or is there one particular area where you can make a real difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I will say that the whole, like, a big part of the reason why we have started on the development of cool suburbs is because there's a lot of greenfield development in Western Sydney, and that's really where you can make a big difference. So those big scale developments where you can actually look at orientation, wind flow, wind paths, and shading and all of that stuff, where you can set it up from the get-go to really sort of achieve those cooling benefits. So where do you position parks, waterways, tree-lined streets? How do you orient your streets, etc., etc.? That obviously is an ideal scenario. However, we also know that there's a lot of infill development, a lot of smaller scale development. So we've really developed cool suburbs to assist councils and industry to make informed decisions, no matter sort of what scale development you're looking at. But yeah, the biggest bang for buck, no doubt, is sort of those larger scale developments. If you can set stuff up from the get-go in a really good way, then you'll have sort of those flow-on effects moving forward. Noting, like you said, heat considerations should flow into sort of those next stages of those developments as well. So it's all well and good if you're setting up your suburb really well, but if you're then implementing homes or putting homes in with dark roofs, no shading, etc., you would still, yeah, obviously not achieve optimum benefit. Just checking in, Kelly, did you have anything to add there?
No, I think that covers it.
Fantastic. We've got lots of questions rolling in now, which is wonderful. And Lisa Neal has raised a really good question, querying whether the tool factors in humidity, which is particularly a key consideration for North Queensland. So does it consider humidity factors?
It does, but it does so based on the climate zones that are included. So depending on sort of the characteristics of the climate zones, that's definitely sort of factored in. It was definitely a discussion by the science panel, sort of, yeah, how sort of humidity could be factored in across those climate zones, as well as things like irrigations in areas where there's not a lot of water. So a lot of that has been battled out by the client's science panel. And again, sort of the consensus is what you see reflected in the tool. So there's not, so yeah, humidity factored in is basically based on the climate zones that you can see reflected in the tool. So cross flow ventilation, etc., they're sort of big sort of considerations as part of the tool, and they are credits listed in the tool. Sorry, Kelly.
Oh, I was also going to say that in the beginning, when Judith referenced, there's that heat safe communities checklist as part of the tool as well, which currently isn't part of the scoring, but under that, there's obviously developers are encouraged to do community risk assessments and that type of thing. And I think there's a really strong role, I think, in that to include humidity when you're making the case for the types of measures and why this particular type of development assessment should be applied to a particular location, and that would definitely play a role there, and also potentially in the types of operational and community-based solutions that you're proposing for the development as well.
And I think that place-based response, and that way then you are picking up the different features or characteristics of that location that are either increasing the urban heat island effect or exacerbating that heat, and you can respond accordingly. Someone else has raised a good question here about with the star rating. So does it actually bring down the heat or just increase comfort if people stay in the buildings? Which is an interesting question.
A really good question. I think that goes back to that resilience framework that Kelly showed. So Cool Suburbs really is intended to do both. So really looking at reducing urban heat, reducing sort of but also reducing emissions and also increasing that thermal comfort inside the home as well. So that's why that resilience framework that Kelly presented at the front, initially when we started on developing Cool Suburbs and also some of our other work, we kind of went around in circles exactly on this question. So what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to reduce temperatures or are we trying to keep people safe? And as part of Cool Suburbs, we really wanted to bring both of those bits together. Noting there's more that we can do, but that's definitely has been very strongly the intent of the tool.
And also, I think it's probably good to clarify that while there are measures in Cool Suburbs for those individual homes, it doesn't delve into things like insulation that are covered, say, in the National Construction Code or in others. So the Cool Suburbs is really focused on reducing urban heat islands and as a result, obviously reducing emissions if we're not requiring as much energy to cool. But I guess yeah, because of the way our planning system is structured, a lot of those kind of building envelope considerations are mandated in the National Construction Code. And I guess this is kind of looking more at that passive design, so orientation, like roof cover, color and materials, rather than those internal, the internal thermal comfort of a building, if that makes sense.
And just adding on from what Kelly just said, a big part of our advocacy and our work, sort of in addition to Cool Suburbs, looks at that. So we've done quite a bit of research and we're sort of working with the Building Codes Board to actually look at increasing minimum standards for heat resilience as part of the National Construction Code review as well. So yes, hopefully there'll be some traction in that slowly.
We touched on earlier about greenfield development. So there's two related questions, and Steve Ashton has put in a question in the chat. Can the tool be used effectively for assessment for retrofitting existing developed areas? And linked to that, can we expand that question? Obviously, we're dealing with a housing crisis nationally, where there is a very big priority to provide well-located, well-designed, higher density to provide housing diversity. It would just be interesting to get your thoughts and comment on, how can we be planning and designing for higher rise or higher density, I should be saying, and how does this impact how our cities and suburbs ventilate themselves? So there's two. I think there's two sides of it. So how do we use the tool to retrofit existing suburbs when we're trying to put more density? How do we provide cool density, I suppose?
Yeah, so interesting. One of our councils, Blacktown, is actually using, and a couple of other councils are looking at this, where they're actually looking at existing suburbs, using Cool Suburbs to rate sort of the existing suburbs, and then sort of model what sort of upgrades might look like and what upgrades would actually achieve a better Cool Suburbs rating. So they're kind of using Cool Suburbs to test those new designs for either higher density or sort of redevelopment of certain suburbs or areas in their LGA. So that's definitely possible to use Cool Suburbs on existing developments and use it to inform sort of better practice. Kelly, did you want to add anything?
I can't quite now remember the second half of that question, but I guess that goes back to, obviously, if you are dealing with a big greenfield development, there are a lot more opportunities to implement measures when you are doing retrofit. You can obviously assess and look at what you can change, but things like, street layouts are obviously already in place, and there's only limited action that you can take in those particular areas. So yeah, it can be applied, but obviously there's some limitations then if you're looking at it from a retrospective analysis perspective.
Just, I suppose another question is, again, in your research and developing and applying the tool, is there a magic number? Is there a magic number of urban tree canopy to negate the heating effects of asphalt and concrete? Or is it going to be different in every location, I'm expecting?
It will be, and it will also depend on exactly like what materials are you using on the streets, the sidewalk, etc., and how sort of like the percentage of how that relates to your green canopy as well. So in Cool Suburbs, it does try and take all of that into account. So when you are looking at green canopy, it takes into account sort of the ideal sort of canopy layout or canopy percentage for your development in together with sort of your street layout, your building profile, etc., if that makes sense. I think that's the tricky thing that we're finding with urban development and heat. It's not one thing or another. It's not just trees. It's materials, trees, layout, typology, all of that sort of together. And I guess that's kind of really at the crux of Cool Suburbs, where it tries to bring it all together in a sensible way, and tries to give guidance for all of those components to work together well. I don't know if I answered your question, but
no, and I think that to me is a key takeaway from all of this, is that to effectively respond to heat, it's actually a suite of responses and measures working together. It's not just urban tree canopy. Obviously, that's really important, but we need a whole suite of options working together across those different scales. There's just so many good questions. Is water sensitive and permeability versus impermeable areas considered in the tool? And I suppose that's actually really important, like to help cool our urban areas, getting more watery features into our urban environments. How does the tool account for that?
Yeah, so there's dedicated credits for exactly that. So water sensitive urban design, irrigation, and permeability, all of sort of that is definitely integrated as part of the tool. So like we said before, the research that kind of underpins Cool Suburbs is like it's really clear on the measures that are sort of the combination of measures that is needed to address heat is very much sort of green space plus water plus cool materials. So water in all shapes and forms are very much considered. And I think I flagged that before. Irrigation was considered really key by the science panel as well, but they were also very sensitive to the fact that particularly sort of inland areas where you have sort of more drought conditions or less sort of rainfall, what that would mean in terms of what we can ask as part of Cool Suburbs, how to satisfy some of those credits. So you should be able to see that reflected in, depending on the climate zone that your development is in, what the tool actually asks you to satisfy in terms of water sensitive urban design, irrigation, etc., etc. Sorry, and Kelly, did you want to add anything there?
No, I think that's it.
No, that's brilliant. Again, the questions are rolling in. Does the tool identify other potential co-benefits associated with increasing permeability and urban greening in developments? So that's a fantastic question. So urban heat and meeting other positive benefits as well.
Yeah, really, really good question. It's something that is not necessarily done that well in the tool as yet. So we've tried to build in sort of what the tool tries to do quite holistically, but this is definitely an area where we are looking to expand the tool a bit further. So yes, really good question. It's on our radar. It's probably not as well integrated in the tool as it could be moving forward.
We know, obviously, permeability, tree canopy, we have a lot of flood risk in Western Sydney, and that's, I guess, one of those co-benefits. And I guess it's, yeah, broadly referenced, but maybe not as integrated as it could be.
No, that's excellent. I suppose it's really just underpinning and reiterating the importance of those, nature-based solutions, more green infrastructure, so we are getting those multiple benefits. Belinda has raised a really good question. Could the Cool Suburbs tool be used to inform the application of sustainability rating tools, for example, Green Star, for the urban heat resilience components of that rating criteria?
Yeah, so we're very happy that Cool Suburbs is an accepted pathway for Green Star communities, like that new urban heat resilience credit that they've recently introduced. So you can use Cool Suburbs, the assessment, the PDF of your assessment, to actually insert that as evidence that you're satisfying that credit. So that is now an accepted pathway.
This is an interesting question. Do you see potential for a pilot in work approvals for industrial premises where there's more space for green infrastructure and the potential for cool corridors with tree canopy between areas of diverse zoning? So I think that's an interesting question in the context that it is looking at that larger scale, using green corridors to help with cooling, ventilation, typically with zones where you've got lots of hard stand, lots of asphalt. So could that potentially be a pilot?
Industrial, that is one of the, like, commercial industrial is one of the land uses that can be chosen in the tool. It would be really good to do a pilot. We know there is, for people who I guess are interested in that area, we would say that some of our councils, particularly the one that comes to mind is Penrith City Council, has done quite a bit of work in particularly around industrial areas and how they can be cooled, and it's a part of their development control plan. So I would recommend having a look at that one. And they've looked at obviously urban canopy and greening, but also providing spaces within new commercial build and industrial buildings that are called cool refuges, where they've required a space, whether it's a lunchroom or a workroom, or that can be shut down and kept cool in the event of really hot weather. So they've also thought about, I guess, that external comfort in the urban environment, that also that internal. So I would, there are some really interesting developments, I think, in that space, but definitely something that can be looked further into, Judith.
Yeah, but I think that would be a really good one to explore further. But yes, it is sort of industrial as part of one of the typologies in Cool Suburbs, but we have not necessarily tested that. So in terms of a pilot in place, so very keen to explore that further.
There's a great question here from Ryan McNeely Smith, and I think it circles back to one of our earlier questions. It was mentioned before that emission reduction of the different design solutions was considered by the science panel in developing the tool. is that expanded on or quantified in the tool or supporting science rationale document? I suppose just being clear about what that assumption is would be very helpful.
Yeah, so the emission reductions bit really comes into sort of the cool building and cool home design credit. So it really looks at how homes and buildings can minimize their energy use. So looking at renewables, et cetera. So that's kind of where that's most reflected. So at the moment, it's we're the Cool Suburbs tool doesn't go necessarily into like building materials or sort of that level of detail. Again, it's something that is in the back of our mind that's not necessarily reflected in a tool at the moment. So when you go in, you will see that reflected mainly in those credits.
And look, I think we've got time for one more question. And Sophie Barrett from Cairns has asked an awesome question. Can the tool show whether there would be a positive gain on existing heat conditions, i.e. better than current or existing conditions for a new subdivision or greenfield site?
So what it can do is absolutely benchmarking. So plugging in sort of different information for your development based on either existing typology versus what you're looking at and sort of playing around with that. So in that sense, it can definitely do that. It is not a simulation tool that actually gives you like a temperature change as such. It really sort of benchmarks it against best practice, if that answers the question.
No, that's great. Unless there are any other burning questions, I think, and I suppose just one tiny more question, and it's John Mabb has raised that Arup is currently assisting the state government with the Shaping SEQ Regional Plan implementation. So in Southeast Queensland, we have a statutory regional plan and it identifies a series of priority actions, one of which is to address urban heat, and they're actually doing a regional urban heat assessment, risk assessment. So he's just querying, wondering whether this tool might be considered to help with that analysis. So John, yeah, that's a very good question, something that we can definitely raise. So Tony, I might thank you everyone for your questions. They're fantastic, and we can certainly share those questions, Judith and Kelly, so that you've got like a record of those as well, because they're actually really, really good, and I didn't get to go through all of them. But Tony, I'll hand back to you. So thank you for everyone for participating.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you, Kelly and Judith, for your excellent answers, comprehensive answers, and thanks everybody to for dropping such meaningful and deep questions into the chat. It really was a great opportunity to sort of ask a little bit more beyond the presentation, which was so comprehensive in and of itself. So thanks everybody for that. It falls on me just to make some closing remarks. The first thing that I'd like to say is that there are plenty of resources that you, the audience that is, may follow up from today's session, and they're all in the chat. There's information on work that's being done by the Planning Institute of Australia in this space. There's links to WSROC, links to the Cool Suburbs tool, and links to a variety of other information. So please do feel free to follow them or open them on a tab in your browser for later perusal. Anyone who was in the audience for today's meeting as well will be reminded that we recorded the meeting, so there is an opportunity hopefully to go back over some of it if you need to. And likewise, you're very welcome, I'm sure, to reach out directly to Judith and to Kelly, and also to us here at the Queensland Heat Health Community of Practice if you'd like to. So please feel free to do that. And just jumping on one more slide there, please, if we may, Anjali. This is an announcement of an upcoming event that is being hosted by our friends from Sweltering Cities, not by the QCOP, but one that we're very happy to mention and promote. So the 5th of February 2025, you can go to the Sweltering Cities event, which marks Australia's first Extreme Heat Awareness Day, and plenty of other information there on the screen. And also you can contact Emma at swelteringcities.org, or I'm sure this information will all be up on their website and Googleable as well. So February 5th, 2025, for those of you that are interested, put that one in your diary, please. And our very final slide for the year is to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year, and hopefully a Christmas and New Year period that's not too hot and not too stormy and is just right. So we wish everybody season's greetings. We again thank our presenters today and Shannon Haynes for her guest chair. We look forward to seeing everybody in 2025. We have great plans for 2025, and we're very confident about the future of the Queensland Heat Health Community of Practice as an entity, and also very confident about all the great work that's happening in this space. So it's been a wonderful couple of years so far, and building this network and extending it and adding more colleagues, and we look forward to doing more and hosting more events next year and beyond. So thanks everybody. Great wishes to you for Christmas and for the new year from all of us here at the QCOP. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much for coming.